Once upon a time, there was a tavern where we used to raise a glass or two. Remember how we laughed away the hours. Think of all the great things we would do. Those were the days, my friend, we thought they'd never end. We'd sing and dance forever and a day. We'd live the life we choose, we'd fight and never lose, for we were young and sure to have a way. La la la, la la la, la 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 la, la 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 la. Well, friends, that was an all-time favorite, and I hope it brought a smile to your faces. And now, with that, I'd like to introduce my guest for today, Luis Rivera. Luis is the managing director at Hexa Global Ventures, which is a business accelerator based out of the US. Hexa has great expertise in HR tech and work tech. And so, if you're a company in that space or a startup in that space, you should definitely listen into this conversation. Hi, Louis. It's great to have you in this conversation on a very exciting topic because this topic around startups wanting to land and expand in the US is something extremely hot, right? And a lot of people really would be keen to understand what it really takes to make that happen.
Thank you for having me, Thomas. In particular, thank you for opening up with a beautiful song. And so I look forward to the conversation.
Absolutely, Luis. And so Luis, I was recently reading a report, from Sapient Insights Research Group, and as per this particular research, HR tech spending has increased by about 57% in 2021. And interestingly, on an average, organizations are using about 16 HR tech systems. And this is as against 10 systems that were being used in 2020 and about 9 in 2019. And this data was collected across around 2,100 organizations of various sizes from multiple industries across about 52 countries. And it seems that this increase has been mostly driven by companies looking at new approaches to really enhance the remote work environment. and come 2022, I think we can expect further growth in this particular area for a number of reasons. One is that the entire HR tech and work tech space is blurring, and there's a lot of innovation having around the entire topic of future of work. So, Luis, how do you see 2022 really panning out for HR tech in the US? And are there any specific verticals or micro verticals that you see really taking off?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, to give you a short answer, it's going to be another phenomenal year. Obviously, you never know what happens with this fiscal policy that could potentially slow that down. However, look, the reality of it is there's a huge shortage of talent, not only in the United States, but worldwide. But beyond that, I mean, the effects that have taken place over the last few years, whether it's COVID, whether it's, the Great Resignation, and or whether it's Black Lives Matter, have all had an effect, an impact on what's happening in the world as far as HR. Clearly, with a shortage of talent, people are no longer just saying, hey, employees are our biggest asset, but they're actually following through on how to protect that. And protecting that can be anything from providing better benefits to providing better technology to just engaging the employee at a higher level. That could be things such as training. It could be incentives. It can be multiple things. And that's why you're seeing the amount of systems increasing. Now, that said, it is true that part of that challenge is that people want a cohesive strategy. They don't just want to add another application. So there has to be value in what you're bringing to the table, and you have to start thinking about what's the strategy for this to be a unified solution. That with that in mind, the reality is there's a great opportunity in the market. It's competitive, but as long as you have a good product and a good strategy, you can still very much penetrate the market. And we see that worldwide. It's not just the US. We see that in all areas, in all sectors.
Yeah, but if you look at what Josh Burson has predicted, he talks about a number of areas which are going to boom. He talks about career pathing, evolution, further evolution of learning technologies. They talk about new concepts like talent marketplaces, internal talent mobility, DEI solutions. Employee experience is probably going to go much deeper. The entire area of people analytics. So among all these verticals that we are seeing, do you see any one or two of them, or maybe all of them, just taking off in
Yeah, no,
2022?
absolutely. Anything that increases productivity, that increases employee engagement. So I'll tell you, just recently, so we have a lot in investment in companies that do upskilling. We have in companies that do incentives, and we have in areas such as LMS. So just improving what the employees learn. And because part of it, if you start to think, the lines are starting to blur between like an LMS and career pathing. I think a lot of the areas that shine, you're starting to see that there's more of a cohesive strategy and also more of a path towards just retaining the employee and making sure that they're satisfied and understand where they fit within that workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. So that really brings me to the core area part of our discussion, which is really the significant opportunity that exists, in markets like the US, which are massive, which are growing at a great pace. At the same time, these markets are super competitive. So there are different approaches that startups are taking, largely from outside the US, and perhaps those based in the US as well. So the ones outside of the US traditionally have been taking a very remote approach. So the founders and their team remain in the home country, and they would like to perhaps test the waters by doing some inbound campaigns. They perhaps look at appointing a channel partner and figure out can they really start attacking the market even though they are not physically based in the US. So that's really one approach. The other approach, which perhaps companies who have raised a ton of money consider, is that can one of the co-founders relocate to the US? Can they then participate in events, exhibitions, conferences, and figure out ways of connecting, generating leads, and making things happen? Now, that's a very expensive approach. I know of companies who've spent tons and tons of money and not too sure about what kind of returns that they've got. And the third one is really looking at, are there people based in the US, typically accelerators, who can help them grow and help them really land and expand. And that's perhaps where the Hexa model fits in as well. So yeah, it'll really be nice to hear from you, Luis, about the Hexa model, and also your thoughts whether a business accelerator is the ideal model for a startup which is seeking to land and expand in the US.
Yeah. So let's start with that. The business accelerator model is very different for different companies. And so what I can tell you is, look, there's business accelerators that just have canned plans, which is you walk through here and you'll have a 5-week training program in which we're going to talk about product market fit, about go to market, about all those kinds of issues. A lot of those are not hands-on. The difference between what we do and your typical business accelerator is that we're actually hands-on, and we don't have a cookie cutter approach. We tailor our approach to whatever the need of the company is. So what we have is a set of different portfolio companies that specifically are able to help get founders into the United States. And you did rightly mention that, look, there's different ways of coming to the US or coming to any other market. But the question is how effective, and also how much money do you have to make it be effective. Because sure, you can move a founder to the US. That said, however, the question is, does that founder have the know-how and the contacts to really make it happen fairly quickly or not? And that's sort of what people like us bring to the table is that we do have specific operating companies that are designed to help the founders, whether it's with marketing, engineering, and or reselling, and many other different functions. So one of the things that we've done, particularly in the HR tech space, is we have a company, a portfolio company that works very closely with us, in which we can do several things, including simply resell the product, and or if a company wants to actually fund a sales resource within that company, they can have somebody dedicated. So what we're providing is sort of the flexibility to be in the US fairly quickly, and more importantly, to some degree, guarantee success. Just to give you an example, 9 out of 10 companies in the Hexa portfolio are successful. That's a very different formula than typical
Yeah.
VC.
No, I think that's very interesting, which really brings me to the question of accelerators in general, and there are plenty of them in different parts of the world, including the US. And what I have typically seen with a lot of these accelerators is that over a period of time, they have started to take a very mass approach. Idea is to onboard a large number of companies, and perhaps they're very good at putting potential investors in front of these companies. But is that all that a company is looking for? I mean, they're looking for so many other areas, and they're really looking for that heavy lifting to be done, because
Correct.
entering a market as complex as the US is basically a totally different ball game. So, does it make sense for accelerators to start building expertise in specific domains, and then over a period of time build more expertise and then expand? So, what are your thoughts, and how has really Hexa differentiated its offering from that perspective as well?
Look, so what we've done is really de-risk our investment in OSCAR by guaranteeing the success of the company, right? So how do we do that? What we have found is that most companies are good at one or two areas. So, the founder may be a salesperson, or the founder may be a technical guy. Well, if it's a technical guy, they're going to be a lot stronger on the technical side. So the size of companies that we're typically dealing with, you find that not every area is covered. And so what we're trying to provide is a mixture of services that we include as part of our investment in order to ensure that company does better. And the number one way that actually works is by helping with sales and marketing. Because at the end of the day, I have yet to see a company that's successful if they can't sell or market their product. And this is particularly true of international companies, which is, look, when you look at the websites, whether it's the colors or whether it's I see a lot of cartoons and websites trying to go to enterprise, or I see a message that perhaps in their native language made a lot of sense, but when they've translated
Yeah.
into English, and more specifically American English, it just doesn't translate. And so that's the kind of work that we do, but also that's the kind of work that is really going to help you raise funds. Because if you're trying to come to the US market, I would argue you really want to try to have US investors. Doesn't mean you can't have other investors, but that's
Right.
part of the benefit. And yes, most companies can put you out there, but most companies are not bringing companies from, international places. And if they are, there's some heavy lifting to be done, whether it's getting the first customers or whether it's, working on messaging or whatever it happens to be. And so what we try to do is we try to offer a service that is all encompassing. And that's how we add value, right? By being able to put you in front of customers, by being able to add board members, whatever the task may be that is going to make you successful, that's what we do.
Yeah. So, any specific success stories that you can talk about, Luis?
Sure,
I'm sure
absolutely.
our listeners and viewers would be delighted to listen to some real life examples.
Yeah, I know. Look, there's two companies I can specifically mention, which they just exited out of our portfolio. One was Engaged Talent. That's ended up selling for 75 times revenue. And the other one's Trend Data. And Trend Data also got sold for a very large multiple. When you average them out, they end up doing at 45 times revenue. So those are pretty big successes. More importantly, and let me walk you through a more detailed without mentioning the company because they're still in our portfolio. But we recently had a company literally 7 months ago that came to us, and the CEO said, "Hey, I'm having problems. I really do need $1 million to continue going. And I, I've heard about you guys. Can we talk?" And I'm like, "Sure, let's talk." And she's like, "Well, but I need $1 million within like weeks, or else I need to shut down." I'm like, "Look, let's talk and let's see where this ends."
Right.
To make a long story short, we ended up providing a certain amount of cash. It was not a lot, and we helped them raise another certain amount of cash for a total of roughly $400,000, as well as we provided engineering services.
Yeah.
That company went from zero revenues to closing out 2021 with close to $1 million of revenue. And for this year, they're looking at $14 million, right? And they just signed up Facebook as a customer. So the point is, what we brought to the table was the ability to very quickly figure out what those guys needed.
Right.
Then also we're able to provide it in terms of financial and or services offered. And then, in a period of 7 months, it's a company that's looking at doing $14 million this year. So
Wow.
how do we do that?
That's amazing.
Bringing people that have been there, done that before, but also are able to very quickly. I think the biggest challenge that any startup has is running out of time. And so what we're able to do is shorten that cycle. And more importantly, like I said, we're a sales and marketing driven organization, which ultimately means that we start helping bring customers, which is really what it takes to succeed in this business.
No, absolutely. No, that's really amazing. And thanks so much for sharing those success stories. And our viewers would really, appreciate having heard that. So with that, I want to move to another area which is fairly close to my heart, which is this entire area of innovation around the product and innovation around go-to-market. So let me just take a small example. In 2019, when I came to Vegas and attended the HRTech conference, there were more than 100 companies who had booths there who were in the talent acquisition space. Now, perhaps some of them had a niche offering, some of them had an extended offering, some had an end-to-end platform. But having said that, uh, I'm sure there would be a huge amount of overlap between these companies. And these are 100 which just came to HR Tech. Imagine how many talent acquisition companies would be around the world, perhaps 300 or 500 plus of them, right? So that really brings me to the question that in many of these spaces, sometimes, you can innovate, yes, but to what extent can you continue to innovate on the product, which will truly add value to a customer, because the customer's requirements today may be only that much, which really tells me that, look, how can we start looking at, and I'm sure people are already looking at it, at innovating go to market. In fact, I was reading an article recently written by someone who said that the future also really would mean innovation and go to market, and that's really critical. So what are your thoughts around this, Luis? Given the fact that the US is a huge market, there are plenty of companies in every domain, but how could one drive innovation and go to market, and how can that truly be a game changer?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So that's one of the things that we see in the good companies, right? Look, they're always uh, going from doing one thing to doing the other thing. So they're trying multiple things, but more importantly, they're also finding the right partners. So what we do see is that the companies pivot a lot, and they become more like agile development, which is, look, we try a sprint and we then basically go and try to see if that works. That means they start doing SEO fairly quickly. That means so you do a multiple of things, and that's what we're seeing that works. And that's sort of what Hexa brings, is that we have a playbook and we have multiple companies in this space. So there's also an ecosystem that you can start working with them. And then part of it, what we're seeing is also the companies that are really succeeding are the ones that it's about product usage, right? So, when you mentioned the stats of how many systems people have out there, part of the reason is because, yes, a company sold into them, but there was no strategy about how to unify all these products. And that's one of the things that another portfolio company we have, which is FutureSolve, what they're doing is combining the best of technologies with the best consultants, ex-CHROs of Macy's, of Pepsi,
Yeah.
And working with medium-sized companies, right? Because when you think about the enterprise, there's people like Accenture who do this. At the small level, there really aren't too many people because it's just too costly. And so it is a question of how do you provide the best service for that customer and also ensure that they're using the product. And what we've seen is
Yeah.
that you do that by many different ways, but certainly starting to think, hey, I don't just need to make a sale. I need to
Right.
ensure that there is value in what we're selling. And more importantly, that regardless of whether my champion who bought the product is there tomorrow or not, that the product continues to be used. And so we're seeing a unified strategy as to how to penetrate accounts, but also people like us are able to bring to the equation more than just one product. And ultimately, building that relationship with that customer, it adds value to be a customer for life.
Yeah. So linked to that is, also the fact that a market like the US, unlike many other geographies, has a legacy of HR technology.
Yeah,
Which means we've had companies who've been around for a long time in the HR tech space, and perhaps they have a lot of old technology lying there.
yeah.
And then you have a whole flurry of new companies with new technologies. So I just wanted to pick your brain on this, Luis. Does it also therefore offer an opportunity for startups from around the world to potentially partner with HR tech companies in the US with perhaps slightly older technologies, and it might take them a real long time for them to self-develop new technologies? So, is there an opportunity for these other companies to white label or to have a partnership, more a strategic partnership? Perhaps that also offers a great offers a great opportunity for startups from around the world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's something that we currently see and help achieve because at the end of the day, look, most of these companies, particularly the more established ones, they have a product that is only developed to a certain extent, right? Because
Yeah,
they don't focus. There's products that are very specific. I'll give you one example. When I was at a company called Human Concepts, we were great at org charts.
right.
Most of the big, HRS systems had some kind of org chart, but it wasn't to the degree that ours was. In fact, the typical thing that they would say is, "Wow, yours is really on steroids," right? Because yeah, we were specifically focusing in that area, and so therefore had teams basically focused and just working on org charts. Of course, it's going to be better than the one where they only maybe they use the library or maybe they have one guy working on it. So
Right.
there was a perfect opportunity for us to do deals with all of the people out there, and eventually the company ended up getting acquired by one of the big players. So those opportunities exist, and it's certainly something that we see as a way of getting to market without putting too much investment out.
Yeah, great. So that really brings me to the last question, Luis, which is again something which I've always discussed and debated with a lot of startups, is the entire discussion around partnerships versus direct sales.
Yeah.
So how do you see this panning out? At what stage of a company should they really be focusing on partnerships? At what stage should it be a direct sales, or is it something that they need to segment and have both together? So it'll be great to hear your thoughts around this.
Yeah. So it really is a question of cost and opportunity cost. So if you have a lot of money, I would argue that going direct is always best. The reason is because you have control because of many different reasons. But at the end of the day, it's a question of resources. And those resources include, because one of the typical things, particularly companies internationally do, is they send one of the founders over to the US. That
Right.
is not a cheap play. And also, I'm not sure it's a good play because, yeah, you sent somebody very knowledgeable about your product, but they don't have any knowledge as to how they do business here. They have very little connections. And don't take me wrong, most founders are very driven. So it doesn't mean that they're not going to succeed, but it
Yeah.
does mean that it's going to be a costly effort and it's going to take perhaps longer than it really should. So why
Right.
do I think that it's a money problem? Because look, if you have enough money and you want to hire your own GM in the United States and you want to hire your own sales manager and et cetera, your own marketing department, then and you have the kind of funds to do if I could, I would probably say that's a good strategy. However, it's an expensive one, and so people
Yeah.
like us, what we try to do is provide some kind of a happy medium in which we're able to look. Initially, maybe all you want to do is test the waters. Let's get two,
Right.
three customers. as you progress, you can start thinking about if you want to build your company, and or you could say, hey guys, how can we put a dedicated salesperson within your team, which is another step in the right direction. Personally, I wouldn't go into a market until I already tried, the partnership methods. And by the way, at some point in my career, I was vice president of international sales. So what I did is I took the US companies to international markets. And that was always my strategy. Look, you try distribution first. Once you have a little bit of brand awareness, and once you have some reference cases and you have some marketing done, then you start thinking about, hey, can I have somebody somehow in the area that could be subsidized, that could be through a partnership, and or once you really start seeing more traction, then yeah, let's go open an office. But most companies initially are not ready for that, and it's going to be a big expense, and it's typically not going to pan out the best way.
Great, Luis. Thank you so much for that fantastic discussion. I think we had a wide range of topics, but really focusing on what it takes for startups from around the world to land and expand in the US. And I think this conversation will have huge value to our listeners, and we hope a lot of startups in the HRTech WorkTech space out there are listening, and they can of course see the recordings and take really advantage of all the knowledge that has come out of this conversation. Thank you so much, Luis, and it was fantastic chatting with you.
Thank you, Thomas. Always a pleasure.